Even as a young child on Tatooine, Anakin Skywalker was a natural-born flyer who wanted to discover the rest of the galaxy, and this drew him to speak to pilots who arrived on the planet. It was during these conversations did Anakin learn of a species native to the moons of Iago called the Diathym or Angels, and their beauty made them dangerous to spacers and pirates. Though Anakin had never encountered one, at the age of 9 he thought he had actually met an angel. When Queen Amidala arrived on Tatooine in her damaged Naboo royal starship, the Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn opted to find hyperdrive parts in Mos Espa, and the Queen disguised as a handmaiden wanted to explore the planet. As Qui-Gon had no intentions of drawing attention in such a dangerous area, he opted to search for his parts in one of the smaller dealers, and there he found the Toydarian Watto and his slave Anakin Skywalker. Anakin hardly noticed the Jedi Master as he was staring at Padme, and he struggled to find a comparison for her beauty. In what Padme later described as one of the oddest compliments she had ever received, Anakin questioned if she was an angel, and the Queen was left confused. During the Clone War, Anakin would help the Angel's moon of Millius Prime by destroying a Separatist laser field. But what if Padme was actually an angel, just as Anakin had described? Would this change Padme's path in politics? Would Padme and Anakin still get married on Naboo? Our story begins on the moon of Millius Prime, where Padme is one of many angels residing peacefully, making occasional journeys to Iago, but Padme wanted to be more than just a citizen. Against the traditions of her elders, Padme entered into politics and joining the Galactic Republic's Junior Senate, as well as a number of academies where she could improve her political acumen. The mystery and historically questionable reputation of Iago was something that Padme was determined to resolve, and cooperating with the rest of the Ash worlds, she began to place Iago and its 1,000 moons amongst the wider known galaxy. As more politicians took notice of Iago's rise, Padme was nominated to become the planet's representative in the Senate, and she began to improve access to the planet, as well as boost trade amongst the Outer Rim. But for all the gain for Iago and its 1,000 moons, the Trade Federation was furious at Valorum's taxation and threatened blockades if there were not changes. With Palpatine secretly orchestrating the events, Queen San Andrasa accelerates the Sith Lord's rise through her weak policies, and with Naboo on its knees from starvation, Palpatine is quick to usurp Chancellor Valorum. Though Padme knew that the Senate was rife with corruption, she remained in the background as Naboo fell under the Trade Federation's control. What Padme was more concerned about was now the defense of Iago's population, as she knew that the Trade Federation would not settle for one planet. Though she was strongly opposed to militarization, she decided to install a network of defenses connected to each of Iago's 1,000 moons, powered by a central grid in the new industrial sector of Iago. This was supported by a small group of starships, which had been supplied by the nearby Mon Calamari shipyards, in what was proving to be a fruitful alliance. But the expansionist policies of Padme did have a drawback, and that was the wrath of the Hutts. The Hutt cartel had not taken kindly to the ambitions of Iago, and they were worried that the Galactic Republic would interfere with their business, so any Angels or Iagoans were captured and taken into slavery. The outcry of those in the Iago system was matched by Padme, and when she asked the Jedi Order for assistance, her anger was increased, as they were unwilling to operate outside of the Republic's jurisdiction. The Senator decided to personally intervene, disregarding her growing ties with the Galactic Senate, and using the hypnotic allure of her angels, she starts by freeing the slaves on Nal Hutta. Guiding her angels through the Hutt's territory, she heard of a growing legend from the world of Tatooine, and when she arrived on the planet, her scouts guided her to the settlement of Mos Espa. In the workshop belonging to the Toydarian slave trader Watto, a young Anakin Skywalker was scurrying about the area, and he was excited about this particular day. Having travelled to Mos Eisley to collect a delivery for Watto, he heard rumours from the pilots that the Angels of Iago were making a visit, and wanted to see why they were so feared. When he returned to Mos Espa, the civilians started lining the sides of the streets, and Anakin joined Shmi under the watchful eye of Watto. As Padme led the Angels through the streets, one of her entourage pointed to Anakin, and Padme greeted the boy, who had been secretly making a stand against Jabba's tyranny. When Watto moved to stop this interaction, the Senator's guards blocked the Toydarian, and Padme offered to free Anakin and Shmi if they would return to Iago and work for the Senator. As Watto expressed his outrage at losing 2 key slaves, Angels appeared to rise from all directions and began to move into the slave quarters to release the enslaved Angels, as well as any other slaves. Having witnessed his other worlds being liberated in a similar manner, Jabba the Hutt refused to let the Angels escape unscathed and travelled to Mos Espa to personally deal with the threat. The Senator's spies had seen Jabba leaving the palace, and moving to intercept him, the Angels decided to combine their powers and hypnotise Jabba, so he ensured the freedom of the slaves. As the Angels now used the activator wands to disable the slave tracking devices, Anakin and Shmi boarded the Mon Calamari starship, watching the other Angels take over the planet. During their journey to Iago, Anakin was fascinated by the stars, with everything that he had heard from the pilots being far better in reality, but now he was free, he became determined to make the galaxy a better place. Once the Senator and the delegation had freed the slaves and returned to Iago, they discovered just why Anakin had been successful on Tatooine, as their routine medical tests had shown a previously unmatched midichlorian count. The Force Sensitive is not given to the Jedi Order, but is inducted into the Order of the Angels, which are a branch of practicing Force Sensitives, who form some of the Senator's guards. Not only did Anakin begin to learn to control his Force powers, but he was capable of using a range of weapons from staffs to pikes, as well as hand-to-hand combat, and soon he travelled the galaxy to protect Padme. The Elders of the Angels were concerned about Anakin's powers, as it would soon be sensed by the Jedi, and they avoided any missions surrounding Jedi temples. This also stopped Anakin from being corrupted from Palpatine, otherwise known as Darth Sidious, who himself was faced with a number of problems. Having ascended to the title of Supreme Chancellor as he wanted, the Sith Lord had already eliminated Darth Plagueis from his plans, but he was faced with what to do with Maul. The Zabrak had revealed himself to the galaxy when he had repelled Naboo's small group of dissidents, but now he debated if this had been necessary or just reckless. The former Jedi Master Dooku had previously approached him and expressed his disgust at the static Jedi Order and the corrupt Republic, so deciding to use the political skills of Dooku, Maul was instead left to control the Confederacy's new army. The activity of the Sith was unknown to most of the Jedi, who were blindly following the Senate's orders, but one Jedi who was not easily fooled was Qui-Gon Jinn. The Jedi had seen his master step away from the Order, and though tempted to follow him to Sereno, he could not stop thinking about the prophecy. Qui-Gon sensed the will of the Force was guiding him away from Coruscant, and requesting to temporarily leave the Order. The Council were concerned that they would have another lost master. Qui-Gon decided to return to the Wellspring of Life, and completing his training under the Force Priestesses, he learned how he could retain consciousness after death. When he left the planet, Qui-Gon decided to return to the world of Kashyyyk and visit his friend Brennon, and soon the former Jedi sensed something in the Force. As it happened, Senator Yorua had returned to Kashyyyk in preparations for Life Day, and with him were a group of senators from other worlds. As Qui-Gon joined the network of Roshir trees, the presence in the Force grew stronger, and he focused on one of the guards in the Senator of Iago's protection. Jumping down to the same level as Padme, one of the other Angels spotted Qui-Gon, but the former Jedi Master told them that he left the Jedi Order. As he examined the Force-sensitive guard known as Anakin, he felt the power radiating off of him, and he knew in that moment that he had found a virgin in the Force, and the subject of the prophecy of the Chosen One. With one of the Angels being a former Jedi Padawan herself, she knew of Qui-Gon's differences with the other Jedi, and thought Qui-Gon could help Anakin further his training. The former Jedi knew that Anakin would have been too old to be trained at the temple, but with Obi-Wan ready to be a knight, he felt no guilt in accepting the Angel's offer, and he was now part of the Order of the Angels. The Maverick Jedi was a massive help in teaching Anakin balance, and with Padme's guard increasing in numbers, Anakin is allowed to leave the planet for further training. Though Anakin had an understanding of politics from Padme, he had yet to encounter many threatening situations, but this would soon change through the formation of the Separatist droid army. As Qui-Gon reiterated to Anakin, the Jedi were static and were therefore clueless to the growing threat, so they spent their time preparing for the conflict and trying to figure out the origins of Maul. The Jedi not directly encountered the Zabrak, and they refused to believe that the Sith had returned, but Qui-Gon thought otherwise and travelled with his apprentice to Dathomir. After being taken to the Night Sisters' village, Talzin greets the two Force users and informs them that Maul was her son, and he had been taken away from her by a man named Darth Sidious. Qui-Gon now knew the identity of a master and an apprentice, but as he left the planet, he felt as if the web spun by the Sith was far more incisive, and he continued his quest to search for answers. Though he had previously dismissed the probability of the journey, Qui-Gon decided now was the time to go to Sereno and find his old master. Travelling without Anakin, the former Jedi had maintained contact with Dooku until the last few years, and he intended to find out why. Arriving at the footsteps of Dooku's castle, the Count and his old apprentice bowed to each other, and beckoning him inside, Dooku hoped this was the start of a great alliance. As the former Master and Padawan sat at a table in the throne room, Dooku knew this was more than just a friendly visit. Qui-Gon was insistent in determining the loyalties of Dooku, so the Count revealed the truth and how he was now allied with Sidious, but had plans to betray him, which hopefully included Qui-Gon. The younger of the former Jedi was once more caught in a dilemma, as he didn't want to betray the Jedi despite their differences, but he also felt that the corruption in the Galactic Senate needed to be countered. Learning that both sides were under the control of the mysterious Darth Sidious, Qui-Gon realised that everyone, including Dooku, were mere tools in a greater plan, and Anakin would be the one to disturb it. Qui-Gon told Dooku of Talzin's vendetta against Sidious, and the Count believes they can now use this against Sidious by turning Maul's loyalty back to Dathomir. With Qui-Gon and Dooku having somewhat of an agreement, he leaves to train Anakin, and Dooku is left to contemplate where his place stood in the war. As he took one last sip from his goblet of Serenian wine, he is about to leave to check on his droid factories when he received a transmission from Darth Sidious. Though the Sith Lord was halfway across the galaxy, he sensed an unease from the Confederacy's leader, and he threateningly told him that any hesitation would be met by his demise. The Sith Lord ordered for Dooku to meet Maul on Geonosis, where the other members of the Confederacy were holding another secret meeting, and he declared that soon the war would begin. Entering his interstellar sloop known as the Solar Sailor, Dooku knew he was fortunate to survive that discussion with Sidious, and setting course for Geonosis, he asked Qui-Gon to join his meeting in secret. Both Qui-Gon and Anakin see this as a chance to visit the droid factories, and with the hoods over their heads, they use the native hives to cover their starfighters. With Anakin remaining with the ships, Qui-Gon tracks Dooku and his allies to their lair, and he listened to Dooku's plans, from the financial benefits for the Techno-Union and the corporations, to the weapons that were being traded. After the meeting had seemed to end, Dooku asked Maul to remain, and very carefully, Dooku asked Maul about his allegiances to the Night Sisters and the Sith. The Zabrak's mind had been so twisted into that of an assassin that Dooku realised Talzin would have to repair it, and he would have to lure him to the Night Sister leader. When Maul left the hideout to visit the factory, Qui-Gon leapt down from his hiding place, and they started to plan for a way to get Maul out of the control of Sidious. Though Dooku was meant to be just a political leader, this did not mean that he couldn't access the resources of some of his corporate allies, and the Techno-Union provided him with replicas of the Republic's forces. Positioning these dummy starships in the Quelly sector, Dooku also sent a droid transmission to Maul, pretending that a Jedi Padawan was guarding the fleet, hoping to prey on Maul's hunger for Jedi blood. To the satisfaction of Dooku and Qui-Gon, Maul was lured by the bait, and when he boarded what he thought was a Republic destroyer, he was put to sleep by Talzin. The Night Sister leader had been informed in advance of Dooku's plan, and though she didn't want to deceive her own son, she knew this was the only way to avenge Sidious. Transporting Maul back to Dathomir, Maul's mind returns from that of a Sith assassin to a warrior of the Night Sisters, and now placed under Talzin's control, he returned to his growing army. With a powerful ally in the ranks of Dooku and Qui-Gon, Dooku's next step was to work on destabilising some of Sidious's political control in such a way that he wouldn't notice, and Qui-Gon knew of a valuable ally. Having heard of the heroics of the angels in freeing Mos Espa's slaves, he knew of their hypnotic capabilities, but also their reluctance in politics, so returning to Iago, he asked the one person who could help their cause. When Qui-Gon and Anakin met with Padme in her palace throne room, it turned out that the senator had considered countering the growing corruption, as she was struggling to ignore it. The Iagoan dignitaries had pestered Padme to not interfere, as it would place the population in danger, but Padme believed that this was delaying the inevitable, and Qui-Gon and Anakin were now encouraging action against the corruption. Once she gathered her council, they reluctantly agreed with the Divine Senator's plan, and stationing a number of angels on Coruscant, as well as other planets with political affiliation such as Raxus Secundus, Padme instructed her angels to create a list of who was corrupt and those who were weak-willed and easily manipulated by the opinions of other politicians. After examining the evidence for several months, Padme concluded that the corruption was much worse than it appeared, and it originated from a century-old regulation by the Senate, which encouraged the Trade Federation to increase their political standing. This now meant she would have to try and reduce greed by motioning new acts through the Senate and bringing danger to both her and Diego. With Qui-Gon and Anakin stationing themselves on Diego as a form of defense, Padme is surrounded by her most loyal angels on their return to Coruscant, and together they begin to openly expose senators such as Orm Free Tar, who was notorious amongst the Twi'leks for his weakness and bribery. Though no one had previously found evidence of his crimes, the angels were able to lure information out of the senator, and now Rye Lothar is free from his ineptitude and greed. The loss of one of his allies did not affect Palpatine, as the Twi'lek was just a political servant, but what concerned him more was that he had not sensed the moment, so he increased the monitoring of all of the senators. This move by Palpatine was anticipated by Padme, and with Qui-Gon's advice, they continued with their operation more discreetly and met senators outside of the Senate office building. It was obvious to Padme that the Neimoidians in particular were trying to save their own skins and gain as much control in the trade routes as they could, especially in the Outer Rim. Returning to Diego to collate the incriminating evidence, Padme gathered the council and her guards to discuss if they should investigate the world of Cato Neimoidia or to discreetly give the evidence to the other senators. As Qui-Gon thought about her plans, he sensed a ripple in the Force, and leaping to his feet, he felt that a threat to Diego was imminent. The starfighters stationed within the Ash Worlds, but outside of the Diego system, reported that a Separatist fleet was approaching, and the defences needed to be activated immediately. Qui-Gon was not surprised by the actions of the Separatists, as Dooku had warned him about the manipulations of Darth Sidious, and this was proof that the Sith considered Padme a threat to his plans. The orders of the angels divided themselves throughout the Thousand Moons, with Qui-Gon and Anakin placing themselves on a Mon Calamari heavy cruiser, and as the Separatist dreadnought reached the Diego system, the ST-Series tactical droid issued an ultimatum. Knowing that Maul was not part of the attack, Anakin sensed an opportunity, and together with Qui-Gon, they boarded starfighters to the dreadnought. The tactical droid ordered for the Master and Apprentice to be eliminated, but using the web of defences to their advantage, they swerved past the volley of cannon fire and slid into one of the hangars. As the alarms echoed through the ship, Qui-Gon issued a warning that the Vulture-class starfighters and droid tri-fighters were in the stage of deployment, and slicing through the B-1 battle droids, Anakin works on reprogramming any droids, using his expert skills as a mechanic. As the battle droids started to turn against each other, the two lightsaber wielders ran to the bridge, and though the Magna Guards and the tactical droid were more challenging than the other droids, they took over the bridge without leaving permanent damage. Moving the other reprogrammed droids to Diego, the tactical droid is left to follow the instructions of Anakin and falsely reported to Darth Sidious that their target had been eliminated. This confirmed to Qui-Gon that Dooku had been telling the truth, and Sidious was now controlling both sides, so they now needed to capitalise on the success. The attack now allowed both of Padme's initial plans to work, and leaving Padme and the Council to distribute news of the attack, Qui-Gon and Anakin headed for Cato Neimoidia. Accompanied by their modified tactical droid, they arrived on the pretense of meeting Lot Dodd, who was one of the senators on Padme's list of corrupt politicians. Landing beside Lot Dodd's palace, Anakin pushes the droid to the ramp and leaves it to greet the Neimoidians, whilst walking a programmed tour towards New Gunray Citadel, and Qui-Gon and Anakin trail them to the elaborate stronghold. As the arrival of the droid at the Citadel was a surprise, Gunray had not even hidden some of his possessions, and Qui-Gon and Anakin targeted his Mechno chair. Attempting to use the Force to draw the chair to an open window, they failed to account for the chair releasing dioxis gas upon movement, and Lot Dodd was quickly consumed by the toxic fumes. The Citadel's guards were also caught in the gas, and remotely detaching the device from the chair, Qui-Gon and Anakin safely placed the chair on board with the tactical droid. Before Gunray returned to the planet, Qui-Gon left Anakin to head to Coruscant, as he knew of a group of friends who were interested in the device. As the HoloNet news was spreading the demise of Lot Dodd, Qui-Gon landed in the Jedi Temple's hangar, and he was greeted by Master of the Order Mace Windu. Leaving the chair in the hands of the Temple's technicians, Qui-Gon knew that the moment had arrived for the Jedi to know the secrets of the Senate, but he still doubted if they would use his knowledge. Standing at the centre of the Jedi Council chamber, Qui-Gon was pleased to see that Obi-Wan was in one of the seats, just as he had wanted, and turning to Yoda, the Grand Master asked him why he had returned. Qui-Gon explained with great detail all of his findings into the corruption of the Republic and Dooku's goals with the Confederacy, then finally the role of the Sith. As the Jedi Council absorbed his words, Qui-Gon sensed a mixture of skepticism and concern, but what he didn't know was if they would dismiss him or act on his knowledge. Over the next days, the Council decided to take Qui-Gon's evidence seriously, and with the Temple's technicians deciphering Gunray's Mechno-Chair, they found incriminating discussions of Sidious and the Neimoidian talking about eliminating Senator Amidala of Iago. Though Qui-Gon was aware of the current Sith hierarchy, he wanted to see if the Jedi were willing to accept that the Sith even existed, and soon Yoda dispatched Jedi to worlds that Qui-Gon had visited. Though somewhat pleased that the Jedi had chosen to act, the introduction of the Jedi meant that the start of the war would happen sooner than later, and Qui-Gon returns to Sereno to discuss the part of the plan with Dooku. The Separatist leader chooses this moment to reveal that before he left the Jedi, he had talked to Sifo Dyas about raising a clone army on Kamino, but this would have to be approved by the Supreme Chancellor. Neglecting to tell Qui-Gon about the true meaning of the clone army, in the event that it was required, he proposed that the next step was to try and block Palpatine from gaining further power before getting the Jedi to arrest him. Qui-Gon knew the Jedi would have to move quickly before Sidious sensed their intentions, and asked Dooku to deploy a small battalion of battle droids, which were not a part of the main army, but showed that the Separatists posed a threat. The first Jedi to encounter the droid army happened to be Qui-Gon's old Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi on the planet of Geonosis. Even though the droids were no match for his lightsaber abilities, he was shocked to find an entire droid factory hidden amongst the rocks, and reported his findings to the Jedi Council. With the knowledge that the Separatists were establishing their own army, Qui-Gon instructed Padme to reveal that she had survived the Separatist attack by returning to Coruscant and addressing the Senate. When the Angels descended on the galactic capital, the planet's citizens and political guests were in shock at the survival of Padme, and she increased the drama of her entrance in the Senate chamber by shifting her pod to the centre of the arena. Addressing the entire Senate, she pointed to Palpatine and asked him to explain why he had not taken more active measures to counter the growing threat. Comparing him to Valorum, it was actually the work of Qui-Gon and Padme which had forced Palpatine to be more passive, as he didn't have the support of his corrupt allies. As murmurs of agreement to Padme's statement echoed through the chamber, Palpatine's eyes narrowed, and he knew he should have been more thorough in eliminating Iago's senator, but he had yet to deploy his secret weapon. When it was his turn to speak, Palpatine tried to diffuse the voices of discontent in his direction by acknowledging some of his passive measures, before he then proposed the creation of a new army. Padme was relieved that she had addressed the Senate first, as a chorus of discontent echoed through the Senate, brandishing him a warmonger. This was not the response that Palpatine had anticipated, as he thought he had sufficient support for what he called the Military Creation Act, so now they would need more direct persuasion. Before his reputation diminished any further, the Supreme Chancellor called for the session to a temporary end, and pretending to go to the 500 Republica in his apartment, he instead disguised himself as a Senate guard. Observing a group of the senators surrounding Senator Amidala, the Sith Lord used his mind to corrupt them with the dark side, and slowly turn them to his will. The change in the mood of the senators and their sudden lack of energy was not lost to the perceptive Padme, and she used some of her hypnotic abilities to counter the effect. This was not enough to push the corruption from their minds, and tapping the comlink on her wrist, her guardian angels rushed to her side and silently dragged the corrupt tendrils out of the senators. As they continued their discussions, Palpatine was furious at the resistance shown by the senators, and he now suspected that the angels had a power that threatened his plans. Returning to his office, he ordered Masamida to notify him of any suspicious activity, as he dispatched Maul to Iago to eliminate the threat of the angels. When the Zabrak was informed of the mission, he relayed this to Dooku, and it was time for the Count to make a move. Leaving his home planet for the world of Kamino, Dooku meets with the Prime Minister Lama Su, and after checking that the first batch of clones were ready, he ordered for a small squad to be deployed with Jango Fett, promising a large payment if he could stage an interception of Maul. Above the skies of Iago, Maul and the new clones managed to stage their fight, and in the presence of the Iagoans and Saesee Tin, who had been monitoring the planet, they returned to their respective planets. Just as Dooku wanted, the existence of these clones spreads quickly across the galaxy, as do the rumours that they had been created in secret by the Republic. If Palpatine had been furious before, he was now incandescent with rage, and attempting to find Dooku, who was one of the only people to know about the army, he found Dooku was unavailable. The Sith Lord was still seething as he returned to the Senate chamber to a series of jeers from the other senators, and before he could speak, Mas Amedda asked Senator Amidala to address the Senate. In Palpatine's fury, he had forgotten about the Chagrian, and it seemed that the angels had influenced him, as Padme called for a vote of no confidence. As the senators all moved towards the voting buttons in their repulsor pods, Palpatine had seen enough, and he quietly ordered into his comlink for the lights in the chamber to be dimmed. The senators looked around in panic, and if they had not been screaming, they may have heard the faint cackles of Palpatine as he moved the repulsor pods into each other to try and strike fear into the senators. The Sith Lord was forced to postpone his attack when the angels rushed in from the surrounding corridors and illuminated the room with their presence, and he reverted back to the demeanour of another panicked senator. As the politicians gathered their thoughts and recovered, Grandmaster Yoda had been absorbing reports from the other Jedi who were confirming the evidence of Qui-Gon. Their meeting is broken when Yoda senses a flicker of the dark side, and this is followed by a desperate transmission from a group of Republic senators who had huddled together after the power cut. Yoda quickly boards a speeder to the Senate building, and by now, the presence of the dark side was hidden, but what he did not expect was the hologram of Count Dooku. Yoda saw the scowl on Palpatine's face, and Dooku began to list a series of accusations in his direction, from instigating the attack over Yago to manufacturing an army without the authority of the Senate. The Sith Lord needed all of his self-control to not unleash his rage at the betrayal, but in his effort, his Force cloak had slipped again, and this time Yoda was present to witness the error. Returning to the Jedi Temple, he found that Qui-Gon was waiting for the Grand Master with Anakin Skywalker, and though Yoda wanted to question why Anakin had not been brought to the temple, now was not the time for such discussions. Qui-Gon could sense that Yoda had deduced the identity of the Sith, and he proposed that they move for an arrest before Sidious escaped. Despite Yoda wanting more council members to tackle the Sith, he agreed with Qui-Gon, as they could prevent a war and the suffering of millions. The trio were accompanied by Battlemaster Sindralig, and boarding a Jedi shuttle to the Senate building, they saw Palpatine was still in his repulsor pod, trying to convince the Senate of his innocence. The Jedi each enter into a separate repulsor pod, and pointing their lightsabers in his direction, they declared him to be under arrest. It did not require all of Palpatine's considerable skills to tell him that the game was up, but he refused to allow 1,000 years of meticulously crafted Sith plans to go to waste. As he spoke casually about the legitimacy of the arrest, he attempted to dominate the mind of Anakin, who he thought was the weakest considering his age, but he was sorely mistaken. The young Skywalker manipulated his repulsor pod closer to the Sith, and with one Force-enhanced leap, he leapt onto Palpatine's pod. The Sith responded by jumping down to the bottom level, claiming the Jedi were trying to take over the Senate, and he tried to rush to a hidden exit to pull him back to the base of the arena. The Sith noticed the senators rush out of the arena, and unleashing his Shining Lightning attack, Master Dralig was sent into the chamber's wall. But as Yoda held off the next wave, Anakin cut the Sith's hands and placed stun cuffs around what remained. In the Galactic Court of Justice in Coruscant's Federal District, the judges which were appointed by Palpatine had been replaced by neutral representatives, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Palpatine attempted to cast the Jedi as the traitors, but evidence from senators such as Amidala Viego prevented any kind of last-minute manipulation. Given Palpatine's connection to the Force, it was agreed that the Sith would be imprisoned at the Jedi Temple's detention center, rather than the Republic's, and the combination of cortosis and duracrete amongst the cells, as well as defences such as laser gates and ray shields, minimised the chance of an escape. With Palpatine gone, Dooku had accomplished most of his original goals, which he set when he left the Jedi Order, and the presence of Qui-Gon had helped him from being corrupted by the dark side. Though he refused to join the Order, he decided to help squash the remainder of the corruption in the Senate, and the Separatists entered into a coalition with the New Republic. Padme Amidala had been highly expected to be nominee for Supreme Chancellor, but the Senator Viego decided to play a lesser role in politics, to ensure the Angels resided peacefully. This role was delegated to Bail Organa, and he altered the cloning program to directly assist the Jedi, rather than the Senate, then reduced the power of commercial groups such as the Trade Federation, trying to guide the galaxy to a better place. After learning of Anakin's journey, from his training under the Angels to his guidance under Qui-Gon, the Jedi had a better understanding on all their Force sensitives. Rather than being too old to be trained due to their attachments, they would now allow them to be trained under the Angels, and the two factions were now loosely connected. With Maul returning to his brothers on Dathomir after their droid army had been deactivated, it meant that the last remnant of the Sith lineage had been broken, and the Republic would enter a golden era again.